Greetings and hello. My name is Zainab Umar, and in this video presentation, I shall be discussing the topic of Module Part 2 for the course Global Economics and Competitiveness, issued by Dr. Eva Pizotto as a requirement for an ISM course in Paris. This is the brief outline of the presentation. The topic is creating an enabling ecosystem for economic development and global competitiveness. So the slides shall start with a discussion of international trade theory, then government policy and international trade, foreign direct investment, regional economic integration, clusters and the new economics of competition, the competitive advantage of nations, the economic potentials of generative AI, the next productivity frontier, global productivity, what are the trends, the drivers, and the policies, US productivity, its new era. Then we'll also touch upon the recent pandemic productivity and how it was affected by the COVID-19 crisis. And then looking at the two types of nations, we look at growth capital accumulation and the economics of ideas. Those nations are catching up and those that are cutting edge. Then briefly discuss a state's case study at the end and then conclude. So international trade theory. To truly understand the debate over trade, we need to take a close look at the intellectual foundations for trade policy, at the impact of trade policy on jobs, income, and economic growth, and at how global trade policy has evolved over the last 70 years. Propagated in the 16th and 17th centuries, mercantilism, a concept, advocated that countries should simultaneously encourage exports and discourage imports. Although mercantilism is an old and largely discredited doctrine, its echoes remain in modern political debate and in the trade policies of many countries. Free trade refers to a situation in which a government does not attempt to influence through any quotas or duties what its citizens can buy from another country or what they can produce or sell to another country. The new trade theory, from which you have Krugman, who won the Nobel Prize of Economics in 2008, stresses that in some cases, countries specialize in production and export of particular products, not because of underlying differences in the world, but however, because the market can support only a limited number of firms. So although all these theories agree that international trade is beneficial to a country, they lack agreement in their recommendations for government policy. So mercantilism makes a case for government involvement in promoting exports and limiting imports. So the main tenet of mercantilism or doctrine was that it was in the country's best interest to maintain a trade surplus, to export more than it imported. So by doing so, a country would accumulate gold and silver and consequently increase its national wealth, prestige, and power. However, the flaw with mercantilism was that it viewed trade as a zero-sum game. So a zero-sum game is one in which a gain by one country definitely translates into a loss by another. So the theory, another concept here is the theory of absolute advantage, which suggests that countries differ in their ability to produce goods efficiently. The theory suggests that a country should specialize in producing goods in areas where it has an absolute advantage and import goods in areas where other countries have absolute advantages. So the theory of comparative advantage suggests that it makes sense for a country to specialize producing those goods that it can produce more efficiently while buying goods that it can produce relatively less efficiently from other countries, even if it means buying goods from other countries that it could produce more efficiently itself. Then we have the theory of comparative advantage. It suggests that unrestricted free trade brings about increased world production. That is, the trade is a positive sum game. The theory of comparative advantage also suggests that opening a country to free trade stimulates economic growth, which creates dynamic gains from trade. The empirical evidence seems to be consistent with this claim. We have the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, argues that the pattern of international trade is determined by differences in factor endowment. It predicts that countries will export these goods and make intensive use of locally abundant factors. I will import goods that make intensive use of factors that are locally scarce. The product life cycle theory suggests that trade patterns are influenced by where a new product is introduced. In an increasingly integrated global economy, the product life cycle theory seems to be less predictive than it once was. The new trade theory, on the other hand, also states that in those industries where substantial economics of scale imply that the world trade will profitably support only a few firms, countries may predominate in the export of certain products simply because they had a firm that was a first mover in that industry. So some new trade theories have promoted the idea of strategic trade theory. The argument is that the government, for example, is sophisticated and has the judicious use of subsidiaries or subsidies, might be able to increase the chances of domestic firms becoming first movers in newly emerging industries. Then we have the Porter's theory of national competitive advantage, suggests that the pattern of trade is influenced by four attributes of a nation. The first is factor endowments, as you can see in figure 6.5 there. Then we have domestic demand conditions, related and supporting industries, and fund strategy, structure, and rivalry. So theories of international trade are important to an individual business firm primarily because they can help the firm decide where to locate its various production activities. And then firms involved in international trade can exert a strong influence on government policy toward trade. By lobbying government, business firms can promote free trade or trade restrictions. Government policy and international trade. Trade policy uses 7 main instruments. We have tariffs, subsidies, import quotas, voluntary export restraints, local content requirements, administrative policies, and anti-dumping duties. Tariffs are the oldest and the simplest instruments of trade policy known throughout time. So what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax levied on imports or exports. Tariffs fall into two categories. We have specific tariffs, which are labeled as a fixed charge for each unit of good imported. For example, we have $3 per barrel of oil. And then ad valorem tariffs are levied as a proportion of the value of the imported good. In most cases, tariffs are placed on imports to protect domestic producers from foreign competition by raising the price of imported goods. However, tariffs also produce revenue for the government. Until the income tax was introduced, for example, in the US, government received most of its revenues from the tariff. A subsidy is a government payment to a domestic producer. Subsidies takes many forms. A subsidy is a government payment to a domestic producer. Subsidies take many forms, including cash grants, low interest, tax breaks, and government equity participation in domestic firms. An import quota, on the other hand, is a direct restriction on the quantity of some good and may be imported into a country. The restriction is usually enforced by issuing import licenses to a group of individuals or firms. We have a common hybrid of quota and a tariff, and is known as tariff rate quota. Under a tariff rate quota, a lower tariff rate is applied to imports within the quota than those over the quota. So a variant on the import quota is the voluntary export restraint, or VER. So this is a trade imposed by exporting country and is typically at the request of the importing country's government. An export tariff, on the other hand, is a tax placed on the export of a good. The goal behind an export tariff is to discriminate against exporting in order to ensure that there is sufficient supply of good within a country. For example, in the past, China has placed an export tariff on the export of grain to ensure that there is sufficient supply in China. An export ban is a policy that partially or entirely restricts the export of a good. One well-known example was the ban on the US crude oil production that was enacted in the Congress in 1975. So a local content requirement is a requirement that some specific fraction of a good be produced domestically. The requirement can be expressed either in physical terms, for example, say 75% of component parts for a product must be produced locally, or in value terms, for example, 75% of the value of this product must be produced locally. So local content regulations have been widely used by developing countries to shift their manufacturing base from the simple assembly of products whose parts are manufactured elsewhere in the local manufacture of component parts. In addition to the formal instruments of trade policy, Governments of all types sometimes use informal or administrative policies to restrict imports and boost exports. Administrative trade policies are bureaucratic rules designed to make it difficult for imports to enter a country. It has been argued that the Japanese are the masters of this trade barrier. In the context of also international trade, dumping is variously defined as selling goods in a foreign market at below their cost of production or as selling goods in a foreign market at below their fair market value. Perhaps the most common political argument for government intervention is that it is necessary for protecting jobs from and industries from unfair foreign competition. Competition is most often viewed as unfair when the producers in an exporting country are subsidized in some way by the government. While the development of the new trade theory and strategic trade policy, the economic arguments for government intervention have undergone a lot of debate over the years. And the generally accepted trade principles was a product of the post-war free trade, the GATT, and it was successful in lowering trade movement towards greater free trade under the GATT appeared to stimulate economic growth. So we now move on to the topic of foreign direct investment, FDI. This is the investment made by a company or individual from one country into business or assets located in another country. When discussing FDI, it is important to distinguish between the flow of the FDI and the stock of the FDI. The flow of the FDI refers to the amount of FDI undertaken over a given period of time, normally a year, and the stock of the FDI refers to the total accumulated value of foreign-owned assets at a given time. We can also talk about the outflows of FDI, the meaning of the FDI out of a country, and the inflows of the FDI or the flow of the FDI into the country. So FDI mostly takes two forms. The first is greenfield investment, which involves the establishment of a new operation in a foreign country. And the second involves acquiring or merging with an existing firm in the foreign country. In this slide, we shall talk about some of the FDI theories. There are several theories that approach the various phenomena of foreign FDI from three complementary perspectives. One set of the theories seeks to explain why a firm will favor direct investment as a means of entering a foreign market when two other alternatives like exporting and licensing are also other options. Another set of theories seeks to explain why firms in the same industry often undertake FDI at the same time and why they favor certain locations over others as targets for FDI. Put differently, these theories attempt to explain the observed pattern of FDI flows. And then the third theoretical perspective, known as eclectic paradigm, attempts to combine the two other perspectives into a single holistic explanation of foreign direct investment. This theoretical perspective is elective because the best aspects of all the other theories are taken and combined together into a single explanation. The benefits of FDI to host country arise from resource transfer effects, employment effects, and balance of payment effects. The cost of FDI to a host country include adverse effects on competition and the balance of payments and a perceived loss of national sovereignty. The cost of FDI to the home country include adverse balance of payment effects that arise from initial capital outflow and from the export substitution effects of FDI. Costs also arise when FDI export jobs abroad. Home countries can adopt policies designed to try to attract FDI by offering incentives and try to restrict FDI by dictating ownership constraints and requiring that foreign MNEs meet specific performance requirements. Regional economic integration. Regional economic integration just means or refers to the process where multiple countries in a specific geographic area cooperate and integrate their economies by removing trade barriers, facilitating the flow of goods, services, and capital, and adopting common economic policies and regulations. Several levels of economic integration are possible in theory. As you can see in figure 9.1, there are different stages that come from the green to the pink colored area to the red area. From the least integrated to the most integrated. They are from free trade area, we have customs union, we have common market, economic union, and finally a full political union. Each stage shall be discussed in the next slide. So in a free trade area, all barriers to the trade of goods and services among member countries are removed. In theoretically ideal free trade area, there is no discriminatory tariffs, quotas, subsidies, or administrative impediments are allowed to distort trade between members. Each country is allowed to distort trade Each country is allowed to determine its own trade policies with regard to non-members. For the customs union is one step further along the road to full economic and political integration. The customs union eliminates trade barriers between member countries and adopts a common external trade policy. The next level of economic integration is known as a common market. It has no barriers to trade policy for its member countries. It includes a common external trade policy and allows factors of production to move freely among members. Labor and capital are free to move because there are no restrictions on immigration, or cross-border flows of capital among member countries. An economic union entails even closer economic integration and cooperation than a common market. In a common market, an economic union involves the free flow of products and factors of production among member countries and the adoption of a common external trade policy, but it also requires a common currency, harmonization of member tax rates, and a common monetary and fiscal policy. For example, the European Union. The move towards economic union raises the issue of how to make a coordinating bureaucracy accountable to the citizens of member nations. The answer is through political union, in which a central political apparatus coordinates the economic, social, and foreign policy of member states, and the EU is on the road to becoming at least partial political union. Clusters and the new economics of competition. Clusters are geographic concentrations of interconnected companies and institutions in a particular field. Clusters encompass an array of linked industries and other entities important to competition. They include, for example, suppliers of specialized inputs such as components, machinery and services, and providers of specialized infrastructure. Clusters are often extend downstream to channels and customers, to laterally manufacturers of complementary products, and to companies in industries related by skills, technology, and common inputs. Finally, many clusters involve governmental and other institutions such as universities, think tanks, standard setting agencies, vocational training providers, and trade associations. So, untangling the paradox of location in a global economy offers insights into how companies continually create competitive advantage. What happens inside companies is important, but when you have clusters, they reveal the immediate business environment outside the companies, which is also a very vital role they play. Being part of a cluster allows companies to operate more productively in sourcing inputs, accessing information, technology, and needed institutions, coordinating with related companies, and measuring and motivating improvement. Here in this slide, we have an image that shows the clusters in the United States. So it allows each member to benefit as if it had greater skill or if it had joined with others without sacrificing its flexibility. An intersection of clusters, insights, and skills from various fields match, sparking new businesses. You have tapping into the competitively valuable assets within cluster requires personal relationships and that insider status. Clusters offer a personal relationship and insider status. They also offer a constructive way to change the nature of the dialogue between the public and the private sectors. Then we have the competitive advantage of nations. Companies achieve competitive advantage mostly nowadays through innovation. National competitiveness refers to a country's ability to sustain and improve its economic performance, productivity, and innovative capacity relative to other nations, enhancing its position in the global marketplace. The diamond in the graph shows the national advantage and the four stages, which shall be discussed in details in the next slide. These four items in the diamond are determinants of national competitive advantage. So first we have factor conditions. According to the standard economic theory, factors of production like land, labor, and natural resources will determine the flow of trade. Then we have demand conditions. These nations gain competitive advantage in industries where the home demand gives their companies a clearer picture of emerging buyer needs, and where demanding buyers pressure companies to innovate faster and achieve more sophisticated competitive advantage than their foreign rivals. We have relative and supportive industries. The presence of related and supportive industries that are internationally competitive. Then firm strategy, structure, and rivalry refers to one of the four determinants that influence a country's competitiveness advantage in certain industries. It relates to the conditions within a nation's business environment, including how companies are managed and organized, their strategies for competition, and the level of domestic rivalry among companies in the same industry. These factors can influence an overall competitiveness and productivity of the industries within the country. The political ideology is an important determinant of government policy towards foreign direct investment. The ideology ranges from a radical stand, which could be hostile to FDI, or non-interventionist, like a free market stand. In this slide, we have the economic potentials of generative AI, the next productivity frontier. We have an image there. For example, we have things like ChatGPT, GitHub, Copilot. These are the trending generative AIs that have captured the current attention of the public because of their significant level of investment in the recent years, and they have helped to advance machine learning and deep learning. In Exhibit 1, the first lens scans use cases for generative AI that organizations could adopt, and then the second lens, as you can see in the light blue area, second lens, it complements the first by analyzing generative AI's potential impact on work activities required in more than 850 occupations. So generative AI could create additional value above what could be unblocked by AI. So banks could realize the substantial value of generative AI, and these are very important in all other sectors. In this slide, we have global productivity, trends, drivers, and policies. Productivity growth mostly refers to getting more value for each hour worked and is a key way to increase well-being and per capita GDP. So as productivity rises, so does the opportunity for real income to rise. The higher productivity of companies also helps broaden the quality and quantity of goods and services available to the consumers. Therefore, productivity is crucial for raising incomes, expanding the economy, and increasing the material well-being of a society. While productivity growth has been declining since the boom in the 1960s in the US and most of Western Europe, the decline accelerated after the financial crisis. So the decline in labor productivity growth in the aftermath of financial crisis in many advanced economies has been significant. Productivity would be 20% higher today in the United Kingdom and 13% higher in the United States if productivity had returned to its pre-recession growth rate. While there are so many possible reasons for productivity growth slowdown, the only consensus about this is that there's no consensus. Every other learned person has their own version of what is the reason. The measurement of productivity raises many difficult challenges. You have output. The numerator of productivity is extremely hard to measure, especially in industries like public services like health and education. Several explanations for the productivity growth slowdown involve also structural shifts. These include the rate of technological diffusion, a maturation of global supply chains, a shift to services, changing industry structure, dynamics, and secular stagnation. Labor productivity can be decomposed into four factors. We have capital intensity growth, labor quality growth, total factor productivity growth, and change in the mix of labor across sectors with different productivity. Labor quality measures the impact of shifts in factors like education on productivity of workers, and then total factor productivity is often used as a proxy for technological progress, reflects the output of goods and services produced for inputs including labor, capital, energy, materials, and purchased services. This factor decomposition reveals that in all countries experiencing a slowdown, weak capital intensity growth accounts for about half or more of the major labor productivity growth decline. Aggregate productivity growth does not occur in unison across sectors, but is the result of sectors accelerating and decelerating at different times, as shown on the graph. You can see it's acceleration and deceleration both at different times. It doesn't really happen in unison. Then we have US productivity, a new era. Labor productivity has been the engine of US economic power and prosperity since the end of World War II. It added 2.2% annually to economic growth and contributed 1.7% annual gain in real income. So looking to the future, similar levels of productivity growth will help the country confront looming challenges, including workforce shortages, debt, inflation, and cost of energy transition. Productivity is the measure of output relative to input. In macroeconomic terms, it's a measure of the value of the goods and services produced, divided by the amount of labor, capital, and other resources required for its production. US labor productivity is running well below its long-term average. US productivity is a story of have and have not. You have state-level productivity is diverging while some states are pulling away and then some other states are falling back. This pattern is at odds with much of US history, where states converged in productivity and income levels. 7 states are currently leading the way. You have California, Colorado, Massachusetts, New York, North Dakota, Texas, and Washington. These leading states are both more productive and increasing productivity faster than all other states in the US on average. So together, all these states provide nearly 1/3 of the nation's jobs and 40% of the GDP in the United States. Now we touch upon productivity and COVID-19 crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a health and humanitarian crisis, but also the most challenging global economic disruption since the World War II. And the path out of the pandemic into recovery and beyond is extremely uncertain. Early signs indicate that economic disruption caused by COVID-19 has driven leading companies in large sectors of the economy to innovate and digitize in exciting ways. But it has not yet been clear whether these actions will translate into a broad-based productivity dividend. Really, businesses had to innovate and move to technology because it was like either you enhance your business with technology or you leave the market. Despite uncertainty, some firms responded boldly to COVID-19, acting in ways that have been potential to increase productivity. Some firms shifted rapidly to online channels, automated production tasks, increased operational efficiency, and speed of decision making. Companies digitized many activities 20-25 times faster than they would have previously thought was possible. So, the Chinese economy has been growing at an astonishing rate. Throughout the US history, it has been documented that the US has never grown as fast as the Chinese economy. There are two types of growth. Now we have catching up and cutting edge. Countries that are catching up have some enormous advantages. To become rich, a poor country does not have to invent new ideas, technology, or methods of management. All it has to do is to adopt the new ideas that are already there and exist in the developed richer countries. Also, as we can see, catching up countries like China grow primarily through capital accumulation and the adoption of some simple ideas that massively improve productivity. The United States is the world's leading economy, but it is at cutting edge. Growth in the cutting edge is primarily about developing new ideas, but developing new ideas is more difficult than adopting ideas that are already in existence. So countries on the cutting edge grow primarily through idea generation. Then we're going to discuss next the solo model, also known as the solo sum model or the neoclassical growth model. It is an influential economic model developed by Robert M. Solow and Trevor Swan in the 1950s. The model is designed to explain long-term economic growth within an economy. The Solow model seeks to understand the determinants of economic growth over time, specifically how changes in capital, labor, and technological progress affect the overall economic output of a nation. There in the screenshot we have the Solow model. So the model makes several key assumptions. First, aggregate production function. The economy's total output, GDP, is determined by the input of capital K, labor L, and a measure of technological progress denoted as A. Then we have diminishing marginal returns. The model assumes that as the capital and labor inputs increase while other factors remain constant, the additional output gained from each additional unit of capital or labor diminishes over time. We have savings and investment. The model assumes that a certain proportion of the economy's output is saved and invested to increase the capital stock. Then we have population growth. The model incorporates population growth as an exogenous factor, meaning it assumes population growth is determined outside the model. The Solow model is often used as a benchmark to analyze the effects of various policies on economic growth, such as changes in savings rates, investment levels, population growth, and technological innovation. The Solow model is governed by the ironic logic of diminishing returns. When the capital stock is low, the marginal product of capital is high and capital accumulates, leading to economic growth. But as capital accumulates, its marginal product declines until per period investment is just equal to depreciation and growth stops. Despite the simplicity of the Solow model, it tells us three important things about economic growth. First is countries that devote a large share of output to investment will be wealthier. Second, growth will be faster the further away a country's capital stock is from its steady state value. This explains why the German and Japanese economies were able to catch up to other advanced economies after the Second World War, why countries that reform their institutions often grow very rapidly, we call them growth miracles, and why poor countries grow faster than rich countries with similar levels of steady state input. Thirdly, the Solow model tells us that the Capital accumulation cannot explain long-run economic growth. Holding other things constant, the marginal product of physical and human capital will eventually diminish, thereby leaving the economy in a zero-growth steady rate. In this case study, the productivity decline, demographics, robots, and globalization. During the 21st century, a noticeable trend of declining productivity growth emerged, but as a consensus on the underlying causes remained elusive. The debates surrounding this decline attract a lot of attention in academia, economics, businesses, and policymakers, so some discussions centered on the technical aspects of measuring productivity as well as the structural shifts resulting from increased robot usage replacing the human workers. So the two main points of contention arose. First was whether the decline in productivity was due to long-term stagnation or secular stagnation, which is a persistent state of low growth and limited economic progress, or if it was more a cyclical phenomenon influenced by deleveraging the aftermath in the global financial crisis. Untangling the sources and drivers of this productivity decline was further complicated by the growing economic integration among countries. Additionally, research findings suggested that innovation was becoming less effective and more challenging, adding another layer of complexity to the analysis. Amidst these uncertainties, questions arose about the role of government and businesses in addressing the productivity decline. Should the government intervene? If so, how? What businesses should take action? And what steps should they consider? So these are all these questions that keep coming up in the dilemma. So overall, the search for a comprehensive explanation and effective solution to the productivity decline presented a complex challenge for all stakeholders involved in economic growth and development. So in conclusion, productivity plays a very vital role in shaping the dynamics of global economics. As we have explored throughout the presentation, it serves as a critical driver of sustainable economic growth and improved living standards for nations worldwide. By enhancing efficiency, fostering innovation, optimizing resource allocation, higher productivity levels, empower countries to seize greater opportunities for development and prosperity. However, achieving and maintaining productivity is not without its challenges. Striking the right balance between technological advancement and workforce skills, addressing income inequality, and promoting supportive institutional frameworks are among the complex tasks that demand more attention. So as we move forward, collaboration between governments, businesses, and international individuals becomes paramount in cultivating an environment that fosters productivity growth. By investing in education, research, and infrastructure, and by embracing technological innovations, we can unlock the full potential of our economies and usher in a new era of shared prosperity. Let us remember that the pursuit of productivity is not just economic activities. It is also a means to enhance the well-being of people across the globe. As we navigate the complexities of the global economic landscape, we should be able to remain steadfast in our commitment to fostering productivity growth and building a brighter and more equitable future for all. Together, we can embark on a journey of progress, productivity, innovation, inclusive development, inclusive and social growth, making productivity a driving force behind a resilient and thriving global economy. So advice is let's remain positive and let the superpowers be able to collaborate and work together so that everybody will be able to benefit. Thank you so much.